Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Art Carter, CEO of California Regional MLS.
That was completely unfair to ask us to follow him. Jamie and I had a lot in common. He grew up in Hell's Kitchen. I grew up in Tustin, California. What we did have in common is we both started out our programming careers on a Commodore 64. And for those of you who lived in those experiences, I used to put thousands of codes onto a machine just to play Moonlander and get really pissed off when my mom would turn the machine off because I didn't have a floppy drive. So I'd have to type it back in every time I used it. So what we're talking about here today is the three sides of real estate and how technology can bind all those three sides together, and what is going on in some of the new models that are forcing both the MLS community and the vendor community to change the way that we're doing things. So I think we have our stage set up, so I'm going to bring up the first person is Greg Larson, who is now the newly minted business principal for CoreLogic. Welcome, Greg, to the stage. Next up, we have Rebecca Jensen from NRED, who I want to be when I grow up. So welcome, Rebecca, to the stage. And next up the stage, let's welcome James Dwiggins, who is the CEO of Next Home. Welcome, James. Okay, guys, I have to do this because I'm sure everybody's been asking this question, and I have to address this elephant in the room. James, how tall are you?
I'm 6'7". Let's just get that out of the way. And I don't play basketball, so we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to keep the line of questioning with you, and we're going to open up with you. Tell us a little bit about your business model and what's unique about what Next Home's doing.
Yeah, so we're a new real estate franchise. We opened in January of 2015. We have moved into 42 states. We have 225 office locations and about 1,700 agents now. What makes us a little bit different is we are kind of a hybrid between a franchise and a technology company. So we have our own engineers and designers. We have a very strong technology background, and so we build a lot of our own software in-house. And our model is very different than most real estate firms. We typically work with the top 20%. So we'll take a very successful independent real estate office, move them into our franchise brand, or we will take teams out of larger real estate offices and have them open up their own location. I kind of call us a little bit of the Starbucks model. We're not about big locations, we're about small overhead, teamwork environment with many locations in a city. So you'll see a lot more of our offices in a city versus one big location. We come from the philosophy that large real estate offices are a thing of the past. If you look at the amount of business being done in real estate firms, the top 20% is doing most of the business anyway. And with the way that we went through the last downturn, we want to keep that overhead as low as possible. So we do a big focus on building software in-house, a very high value proposition, because we think that the agent needs to work a lot harder at articulating their value proposition to the consumer. So.
I didn't throw you this one, but what is the value of MLS data to this model that you've built?
Well, I mean, it's part of it. You know, I come from a real estate family. My father was an association president. In fact, this kind of dates us, but he was far enough back where they went from a book to a first DOS-based system called Boris, for anybody who's familiar with what that is. And you know, I always look at it from the data that we're so held up on is candidly such a small percentage of what realtors actually do. I don't think it's as valuable as most people says it is. I mean, even the gentleman from Google just talked about that. It's not really about the data, it's about what you do with that. And so I look at it from 95% of what a realtor does is actually providing the services, it's negotiation, it's working with that customer to find a home. And it's like this conversation about online search. It's 5% of the process. The other 95% is what goes on after they find the property. So it's important, but I don't think it's as important as a lot of people probably place value on it.
Okay, very good. Greg. MLSs are being pushed by not only the new models, but by what's going on in the technology world. We have the brokerage community, and especially a new model being represented up here, and MLSs and the vendors that serve those MLSs are constantly being pushed to address the need to be faster, quicker, less complicated, really get out of the way of the brokerage community and what they need to do with the consumer. How does CoreLogic view that, and how do you feel that you guys are going to address those issues going forward? It scares the heck out of me to see the concept of a 5-year-old who, as Jamie was saying, is going to view the world completely different. How do we address that? Even dealing with my 12 and 18-year-old that look at things completely different, what are we going to do to transition and answer some of those questions?
Well, one of the first things, as far as speaking with James and a dozen other tech brokers, iBrokers, e-brokers, new era brokers, one of the most frustrating things is getting the MLS data in a timely fashion, right? 2 components. One, getting signed up, getting approved, getting the credentials, and getting it working. And then secondly, the speed of delivery and the frequency of delivery. So let's talk about faster. Getting James and others what they want faster is really upon the industry, the MLS operators, much more than the CoreLogic or any other MLS vendor, because it's a paperwork process, right? And the single loudest source of complaint coming from brokers is I do the application, I sign the data license, and I wait. And it takes days, often weeks, to be approved. And I think some of you at least had in the past, hopefully not many of you have now, a committee or a task force that must approve each new broker feed, IDX vow, or a full data feed. And that committee or task force may only meet once a month. So you can imagine the frustration in a guy who's rolled out 200 offices since 2015, the wait time when it ends up being weeks, or even in the case of, we don't have a task force meeting in July, it's going to be 2 months before your credentials are approved. So that's a process thing. I hope all of us can work on that. CMLS best practices can certainly lend some guidance there, but that's got to get down to days. It should never take weeks. I think that's, as far as faster goes. As far as quicker goes, quicker is an area where CoreLogic and other vendors are working to improve it. CoreLogic has made a commitment to people like James and their vendors, brokers and the vendors, to be able to deliver sub 1 minute data updates, minutely refreshes of your data all day long. So there's no more every 6 hours or twice a day for the data updates. These brokers want to work in real time. They need real-time data for their systems to work. And so CoreLogic is proud to say that they'll have it under a minute by the end of the year.
Okay, very good. Rebecca, I'm going to throw you the next question. MLS is an innovation. Are not mutually exclusive terms, but we're accused many times of not being the best of friends. How do you see that the constant push-me, pull-me battle that MLSs have with their brokerages, and how often we're defending what it is that we do at the core, which is a broker cooperative? How do we innovate, and how does the consumer work into that whole entire concept of how we're innovating and what we should be doing from the technology side, which goes above and beyond what it is that we do at our basic core?
Well, there are so many different facets to the MLS, and you're right, it is a push-pull, and sometimes the relationships with brokers can be tense and not completely unearned. I mean, if you can step into a broker's shoes, sometimes it's like they call the MLS and it's like, how can I buy a hassle? Do you want a huge hassle? Do you want a medium-sized hassle, right? We have all of these policies and all of these systems that maybe when they were created had a purpose to be that way, but as times change, MLSs need to evolve with either policy or technology, and usually they tend to go together. And so I think it's incumbent upon MLSs to be proactive, to reach out to their brokers and say, okay, what are the issues that you're dealing with? And then it's our job to say, how can we help those? Because as James just said, brokerage and helping consumers is a long process, and the MLS has a small part in that. But it could have more of a part in that if the mindset were to shift. And so an example of this would be A couple years ago at MRED, we started talking to our brokers, and a lot of brokerages were doing coming soon listings, and they were using that as a competitive advantage in their marketplace. And we said, okay, as an MLS, we can certainly help with that. And so we ended up tailoring our policies and our software to help those brokerages. And so we stayed current. Recently, I've been talking to brokers about their transaction management platforms and how, some MLSs have one, but generally there are third parties out there that provide great platforms. The problem is that they don't work well together. And while that might not, on the face, seem like an MLS issue, MLSs have the ability to pull parties together and have policy changes or facilitate discussions and enable software packages to work better together. We've had great success with RESO, and it took MLSs to do that in conjunction with vendors and with brokerages. And so we just have to maybe look at the role that we can play in pushing technology forward, all at the end of the day to help brokers with their consumers, because consumers, that presentation that just happened was a great example of consumers want things now and they want it to be easy and they don't want that hassle. And so we just need to keep that in mind.
James, one of the things I love about James, guys, is that he is very opinionated and an incredibly intelligent guy and is very well thought out in his answers. And I'm going to throw one at him that we talked about on a phone call last week that it was very compelling, your answer. Are MLSs at their core technology companies, or should they really be looking at themselves as broker cooperatives?
I spent a lot of time thinking about this, actually, especially on the flight over yesterday. Look, we're all trying to figure out, I think, as an industry, where we all fit in this equation. I think it's important for you guys to think about what a brokerage is worried about. We're worried about, E&O insurance. We're worried about the next lawsuit. We're worried about standards. We're worried about getting our agents to do their jobs correctly. And fundamentally, at the core, as an industry, if our agents cannot articulate their value proposition, then none of us are going to be here. And that's fundamentally what most brokers are trying to figure out, is how to deal with that. And I think if you identify who your customer is, which most of us would say that we're your customer, your job is to support us and helping us make sure that our agents are doing their jobs correctly so the consumer chooses us versus doing something on their own. That being said, there's a lot of challenges with that. If you are an MLS and you're building products that compete with what brokers are trying to build to get their agents to find value in the brokerage, then we're in competition with each other. And that's not a good place to be, because your customer is now seeing you as a competitor. So I kind of lean towards the broker co-op, but it's more of a hybrid. We've got to get some sort of standards in place. Like, we have to make it easier for us to move in, work with MLSs. I have 125 MLS feeds, of which there's hardly any standards to any of it. We have MLSs that do requirements for a certain number of IP addresses, and you have to display stuff a certain way and the other 124 don't. And it's mind-numbing what we go through. And at the core of it, if it's about a broker cooperative and a solid set of data and an easy way for partners to work with you and brokerages to get that data, then I think that's a good foundation to work from. I'll throw out a controversial statement. I've actually always asked this question: why have we not figured out a way to get FSBO data in there? Fundamentally, I'm just going to ask the question. There's a lot of FSBOs out there. Why don't we have that data? If we were the place where every home for sale in the United States was housed through that system, then we start to create a lot of longevity with that. And we're scared of it. The whole industry is scared of it. We're not supposed to talk about FSBO at realtor conferences, but that's the reality of everything the gentleman just before us talked about, was what the consumer wants and the way that they're going to move this industry. So we have to start thinking about that. I think a strong broker cooperative, the foundation of it, designed to give the information out there, make it easy for companies to innovate, is what it's about. I have a partner, Cloud CMA, they're over here. We have MLSs that still will not give them sold data because they will not be approved as a vendor. Cloud CMA, like one of the biggest CMA programs in the country, I can name 3 MLSs that don't do it because they don't want the data to be out with a third-party vendor for solds. This is 2017,
And we've asked him not to name names up here, so.
Which I didn't. Yeah.
You're doing good.
Yeah.
You're doing good.
Yeah.
So, given your opinion on, leaning more towards the broker cooperative side, how consumer facing should an MLS be?
Let me answer that two ways. I don't think that's probably the right approach, because what ends up happening is you're now another website that's competing with a brokerage site who has a variety of ways that they generate business and revenue. I do think an MLS that has strong data and the ability to provide more information to the broker, like energy data. You can go to Utility Score and find out how your home compares against other homes in a neighborhood to see, what your energy bills would be. And you can go, if you can do these window upgrades, it'll reduce your energy costs down to this. You can save this amount of time and money over 10 years. That's the kind of stuff I think that could be useful for an MLS to provide, is a lot of additional data components to the brokerage or the vendor to give that information out to the consumer. An MLS should, at the core, be about making the agent look better to the customer and the brokerage better to the customer. If we can do that, then the concerns about where this industry ends up are less of an issue. I see it that way.
So, Rebecca, you, like I, are constantly caught in this void of providing what James is talking about, all this data and this great technology, and delivering it at Kmart prices. How do we fix this?
Well, I want to go back to an earlier question that you had,
No offense,
which I will.
No offense to
I'll answer
Kmart
that
and
in the
anybody who
context.
likes.
But whether or not we are a technology company speaks directly to that, because the more that an MLS spends on technology, obviously the Kmart prices are going to be affected, and you're going to have to price your services. And the industry as a whole is reticent to raise fees. And I mean, Stefan talked earlier today about the amount of money that's being invested. And so I think there are a number of different ways that MLSs can address it. First of all, there are no hard and fast rules that I have been able to come up with as far as the technology mix that an MLS should or should not do. I think that it's a conversation that you have to have with your brokerages. And I have been challenged with some very prominent brokerages in Chicago saying MLSs are absolutely not a technology company. To which I've responded, I don't know how to run an MLS without technology. It is not possible. You tell me why. And so then I started going through the list and saying, okay, so you're saying that I should cancel our cloud CMA contract? No, don't do that, right? There would be a riot, right? Because it's well liked. Okay, so that technology is okay. How about our MLS system? Oh yeah, that one's okay. So I think that it has to be a conversation that starts early, before technology is adopted, and so that we're not surprising a brokerage who strategically is trying to differentiate themselves from their competitors. But if they're not, and you have a great relationship with your brokers and you say, hey, I'm thinking about bringing this brand new product to market, is it going to step on your toes? And they'll tell you no or yes. And if it's not stepping on toes, then you come out the winner in it, because you do allow your MLS to provide the marketplace with technology that keeps current with the times. A great example of that, you talked about MLS public websites, which for a long time, the Chicagoland brokers did not want any sort of a consumer-facing website until the broker public portal came around. And that changed the conversation because it was done differently than they had seen in other markets. And now we're hugely supportive, and we're going to be doing direct consumer advertising to promote HomeSnap. So I think that it has to be a conversation, and don't get stuck to any hard and fast rules. Don't get stuck in, you're going to be leveling the playing field and you should never do that. I think that we need to move beyond that.
The pricing comes down from consolidation, though.
It helps
I'll just
to
throw
have
what it
money
is.
when you, yep.
It's consolidation.
We'll get a line of questioning going about that as well. But I want to ask Greg, unfortunately, the vendor community is the one is a recipient of these squeeze margins and this race to the bottom, so it seems. The MLS community is so dependent upon companies like yours and smaller companies up and down the food chain to provide us with the innovation that we need and the additional tool sets that the brokerage community needs. How do you guys balance all of that in this era where there's not, there's VC money coming in right now, but they're coming in not into our space, which is the MLS community. They're coming into to other areas. How do you work all this out and still provide innovative product given the ecosystem that you live in?
Well, a lot of it we've brought upon ourselves over the last 20 years, I think. I mean, Clarity Consulting has been around for 21 years. We've helped hundreds of you with RFPs, system evaluations for software, transaction management systems, or public record systems, all kinds of technology decisions, which comes down to competitive bidding and pricing, right? And the flaw that we've seen over the years is when you try to always go with the low bidder. Some consultants really drove that and really encouraged companies to price things at cost or, God forbid, below cost. And those kind of contracts never work out for the long run, right? I mean, it's not a fair win-win agreement. So we historically and still today have always recommended working out a fair deal. If you're renewing a vendor contract, don't make them match the price of the next new low bidder who hasn't proven themselves. I mean, companies need to make money for R&D to continue to advance. They don't need $200 million cash infusions to improve the systems we have, but they do need to be profitable. And at the end of the day, I've spoken with many MLS executives who say, we're willing to pay a little more because we want good service. We want them to help us when we need them, and we want them to continue to grow. So if I could speak for all the vendors in the industry, small, medium, and large, I would say that you, as the buyers, should make sure that those contracts are priced right. And in the end of the day, that's a better, healthier ecosystem of the people that are building applications for you and for your agents to be healthy. I mean, while Compass, Open Door, Redfin, just 3 companies, Stefan mentioned a bunch of them this morning, those 3 companies have collectively raised over $1 billion. Mm-hmm. And the market value this morning for Redfin, it went on a little run this week, was $2.2 billion. Redfin hasn't made a lot of money yet, is worth $2.2 billion. It took Zillow years to be worth $2.2 billion. Redfin went public July 28th. So, can we compete with that kind of money that's built some beautiful technology? Those companies, all 3 of them I mentioned, have new technology. We don't have to raise that kind of money. We can't raise that kind of money, so we have to do it ourselves. And that is pay a fair price for a fair product. And I think you all know that there's a lot of smart people out there in the vendor tech community in real estate that can build good stuff. So,
very good. Let's switch gears, and James, back to your hopefully a little bit about the consolidation piece. What are the biggest challenges you're facing as a newer model brokerage, and how do you see those challenges being fixed for you?
Well, I mean, the elephant in the room, consolidation in this whole industry is going to occur. It just is. I mean, if I was to give you my crystal ball, I'll tell you this is what we see. I see half the number of realtors in 10 years. It's already happening. If you look at the way that the amount of deals being done by a certain percentage of agents in this industry is continuing to shift upward. It's a small group of people doing a mass amount of business. And you can't sustain a model if you have the small number that's actually doing all these transactions. So big real estate offices are very susceptible to being closed because of it. They lose one or two of their big teams, and 80% of the revenue went out the door. You look at Redfin, it's W-2. They're employee-based. That's what they do. So there's a model, people question it, people talk poorly about them. I think Glenn Kelman's one of the most brilliant CEOs in the business. They're worth $2 billion now, as he was just mentioning. And I think that they're here to stay. It's a company I've been watching for some time. And I've had some drinks with Rob Hahn over some whiskey talking about W-2 versus 1099, and we have huge issues going on whether this is going to happen or not. I mean, there's multiple lawsuits happening between Lyft and Uber and Munchery and other companies. We had one in California, thank God we got thrown out, but is it a matter of time before that becomes a big issue and we lose one of those battles? Maybe. If it does go that route, then you see
don't
1.2
profit.
million people reduced to 500,000. If 500,000 people are left, half the room is gone here too. I mean, that's the reality, right? Brokerages are going to consolidate, the whole industry consolidates. And at the end of the day, it's a matter, I believe, of how you position yourself to look towards what will probably occur in the long run. As an industry, we can move closer together, that those benefits of cost come together when you consolidate. Bright MLS is a great example of somebody who's been doing it really well. And you get the benefits of buying power, the costs come down, the broker's costs come down, the agent costs come down. You're not having to use all this vendor money to try and make dues. So to me, it's going to happen whether we put our head in the sand or not. And it's not just from you guys as an MLS industry. We're facing it as a brokerage community too. We see it coming. And so I think it's a matter of looking at that horizon and the way the consumer is going to continue to change things and what they want, and we have to start embracing that. It's as simple as that.
Very good. Rebecca, Stefan brought up a figure that he and Greg had worked on of $750 million in revenue in this industry. And just using a thumbnail of 50 to 60% of that being spent on technology, that's a pretty significant spend across the board. But we often, within the MLS industry, don't get brought the greatest in technology and often look at new models with a certain way that they all have three heads and they take time. I remember talking with Greg Robertson about how long it took for him with Iris software to gain acceptance, and going to Russ Bergeron and getting his head beat in on a couple of occasions. So how do we change that dynamic, and how do, once again, being part of the MLS Roundtable and the discussions we've had about change, how does that change occur within the MLS industry?
Well, I think that it has to occur with us working together, first of all. MLS Roundtable is one example of that. Obviously, RISO is another example. And MLS Grid is 8 MLSs working together to share in technology cost to benefit brokers. So I think that there are a lot of elements happening in the industry today that will be fostered. And the other thing is with products, I'm a big believer if you can measure it, you can manage it. I know that RISO is working on, they have a work group that is called the Internet Tracking Work Group that's all about analytics. And we only have so much money to spend. Even in the aggregate, obviously it's larger, but each MLS has a product mix. And so, for example, at IMRED, I use a portfolio management process called StageGate, that we look at every single vendor contract every single year and see how much we're spending, how is it fitting strategically, what do our customers think about this product. And some of them don't make it year to year. So we cancel those contracts so that we can reinvest money in the new products that are more closely mirroring the business models of the brokerages that are making it happen in our marketplace. And so we have to be very, very diligent in how we spend that money. And again, I just think that the more that MLSs can work together, then the economies of scale are going to kick in just like they have with RISO.
Do you have a belief that meaningful change in the MLS industry can occur?
Absolutely. I think that it's happening. So it might not be happening in every single MLS, but the conversations that are happening today are certainly different than they were even 5 years ago. We have had a wake-up call. And as David Sharon puts it, right, it's our turn in the barrel, I think, to where, we need to really step up our game. And I just talked to my MLS colleagues, and it's no longer the conversation about, did you hear what they said? No, there's been that acceptance phase that's happening, and now the conversation is shifting to one that is, okay, we all need to figure out this problem, because while our markets might not be contiguous, our issues are pretty similar. And so we need to put our heads together, put our staff together, and figure it out. And so I think that is happening.
So, James, what does meaningful change in consolidation look like to you? You're across a wide contiguous part of the nation. What would that change look like for you?
Well, I mean, I look at it from, what is it, there's 700 and something MLSs.
Stefan said 695 this week.
695, okay, so probably, I think it's like under just like 600 of those have less than 1,000 members?
Yes.
Okay, so is it 100 MLSs across the US? Is it 50? I don't know. The economies of scale, this conversation I always have, it's like, oh, well, it's different in our market. Yes, every market's slightly different, but from a technology standpoint, it's one database and it's templates per market. The interface just changes slightly. It's not technologically, it's all feasible to be done. It's the hard decisions about, consolidation is job loss, and that happens, like I said, it's gonna happen in our portion of the business too. If it goes down this road, it's gonna happen across the whole industry. But I think that that's a reasonable thing to look at is, certainly a smaller number of them, we get the economies of scale with that, the costs go down for the members, everything goes down, and we're able to be a little bit more nimble. And it's a lot of the things that we can't see yet. I mean, we're starting to talk about AI. I mean, some of the conversations I'm having with engineers about what they're going to be able to do and how stuff's going to learn what the customer wants, like Google Home, being able to identify your habits and what you've done online and say, here's the 5 homes that are likely something that you're wanting to look at. I mean, those things start to question the value proposition of the traditional industry. The more that we can figure out how to be a part of that and embrace that and be the industry that pushes some of this innovation forward is what's going to keep us here. And I keep coming back to that. It is, if I put 800 people in a room that are agents and I were to ask them, how many of you believe your seller knows what they received for the commission you charged? Most of them will not raise their hand and admit that they do. And that's the starting point. It's shifting that so that they're able to be an important part of that process. And then all of these components are part of that as well. So, I don't know, 50, 100 of them? Want to throw anything at me?
Could a consolidated database that was serviced by 695 people answer most of your concerns?
Yeah, I think it could be, but at the end of the day, we have association dues, MLS dues, all these other dues that are there. It's expensive, right? So we use dues in a lot of ways to keep people out of it. But the license is statewide, right? In California, we can sell real estate anywhere in the state of California. So those are all, I don't know. Those are definitely things to look at. We manage right now, as I said, 125 MLSs. We have 11.9 million listings in our databases. It's really not that complex. The complexity comes from 125 MLSs who do things differently, who have requirements that are different, who tell us you can use 2 IP addresses when we need 9, because we have a staging environment, a beta environment, and a live environment that we had to tell the MLS on 3 different occasions to change the IP addresses, or it's display something a certain way for our MLS, but it's not the same for any of the others, so we have to build the program to display differently for that, or it's bathroom count. This is the one, if you ever want to talk to engineers, have them talk to you about bathroom count. I mean, it's mind-numbing, the stuff that they show me where there's no standard for this. And this is stuff where it just makes it really expensive for companies to innovate and vendors to figure out how to work with everybody. And we're only 125 MLSs. I have gray hair at 37. I can't imagine when we actually are dealing with 600, right? So, I mean, you're all hearing things you know. It's just a matter of how do we sit down and start realizing the way that we need to move, or someone else is going to push us to do it. It's this conversation about Zillow. Everybody in our industry, have you ever heard this conversation about Zillow becoming a broker? Anybody? Okay. Yeah. Which is like really funny to me. The reason I find it funny is because Zillow's market value, I just looked, was $7.6 billion. Realogy, which is the largest real estate firm in the world, its market value is like 4.2. So if Zillow was to become a brokerage, they devalue their stock by about 40%. So the conversations we're having are the wrong conversations. While everybody was focused on Zillow, we should have been focusing on Redfin, who behind the scenes came up doing commissions at a certain percent, their employee base, we're $2 billion now. So there's
Rebecca,
that.
Quickly, I no longer feel that the MLS is going to be thrown out with the bathwater, as the baby. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, what is the right conversations that we should be having around these tables? And what are you doing in the Chicago marketplace to address some of the things you just talked about?
Well, I think you just need to be easy to do business with. Listen to them. I mean, I have complete empathy. So MRED is part of the MLS Grid project, which is, like I said, 8 MLSs working together. And you know, when we pulled all of our IDX license agreements together, like you have done, and looked at what you have to
Oh my God.
read through with your attorney and how much time, it gives you so much empathy to say, really, what are we doing here?
Or the fees. That's the other thing.
There are so many, the disclaimers, and this policy this way, and this
MLS
policy.
in Florida that charges $50 a month per agent to have an IDX feed.
So
Per agent.
there is definitely dysfunction
Not
in our
naming
industry.
which that particular
We'll name
MLS would be, but
But I think that we need to identify, it's the 80-20 rule, right? What is going to give us 80% of the value with satisfying 20% of the work? And so that's why I think MLS is working together. For example, with RESO and the MLS Grid is going to start satisfying some of those issues. Once we get finished with those, then let's move on to the next, 20% that remains. Again, I think that there's progress being made, probably not fast enough, but I know that it's something that is changing the industry because MLSs are gaining more empathy to the chaos that we're creating.
Greg, I'm going to give you the capstone. You've been a consultant in this industry for quite a long time, been involved with the industry, and did you ever think you were going to be one of the graybeards when you first started? And as such, is meaningful change actually possible, given all of the struggles that we face, the politics, everything that's going on?
It's meaningful one county or one market at a time. I hope we see a couple more mega roll-ups, like you're doing out west, like Dave and Tom did out east. And hopefully that'll happen again and again, and maybe Grid will solve a lot of those problems. But like in Northern Ohio, it was, they're getting together. They've been talking for 20 years. And now the brokers there, HER, Howard Hanna, Cutler, the multi-office brokers, to them, it's meaningful change. This is the best thing that's happened for them from an MLS in 20 years, probably. So localized, do what's right for your brokers, and I think there can be meaningful change that continues. It's not going to go as fast as everyone wants it to. There will be holdouts, but I think it's moving at a new pace now. So.
You and I joked yesterday that it was going to be 50 by 2050. Is it going to be quicker than that?
No, I think there'll be 5 real ones and 45 holdouts by 2050. Maybe 2040.
With that, we're at the end of our time. Everybody, please thank our panelists for their time and their efforts here.
Thank you.